I first joined the Do-Re-Mi project during the summer of last year. I thought it was a really great way to share my passion for piano playing with others in ways that I hadn't before, because before I joined this wonderful organization, I was mostly performing at senior centers, charity events in order to give back to my community, but I never really had the experience of actually teaching anyone or sharing music that way. Of course, I figured it would also be a really fun way to use my spare time during quarantine. I knew I was going to enjoy the experience because it's really fun to interact with kids, but I didn't realize how eye-opening the experience of tutoring them was going to be until my first few lessons with them, because all my students are so different from each other personality-wise, and they came to me at different skill levels. So throughout the whole process of tutoring, it has really just been me adapting to their needs and their learning styles. I think that in itself continues to be a really invaluable learning experience for me, because I have better understanding of how to adapt to various social contexts, and I found that it has also really strengthened my teamwork skills so that I am more able to work with different types of people. Being involved with the Do-Re-Mi project also really reinforced the idea that the responsibility of a musician is to communicate and share different emotions and stories through music, but that doesn't mean it has to be through performing. I think that before I started tutoring and when the pandemic started, all the competitions, performances, everything stopped. And I remember that even though it did give me time to relax, it almost kind of felt like, what am I supposed to do now? I think that tutoring my students reminded me the different roles that musicians can take on, especially as a pianist. Even though performing was a way of spreading joy through music, performances were usually just by myself as a solo, whereas with other instruments tend to have more opportunities to work with others in ensembles. Tutoring just really helped me see that in reality, piano doesn't have to be just solitary, and there are still ways to work with others. Obviously though, this also means that because I've gained some first-hand experience of what it's like to be a teacher, I can say that I appreciate even more of what my own piano teacher has done for me, because once the lesson starts, then I have to be completely engaged. My brain has to be completely on if I want to provide my students with quality feedback, so I really respect all teachers for their mental stamina. But even though it can be a little challenging, just feel so lucky that I get to be part of the Do-Re-Mi project because of the bonds that I formed with all of my students. They honestly just keep me so motivated even when I have days that are busier, since tutoring them allows me to slow down from the different things that are going around me. An extremely memorable experience I had through this whole tutoring process so far was one with my initially shyest and probably quietest student. When I first started tutoring, he was relatively silent throughout our lesson. It was mostly just me talking at first while he just listened. I remember when we first started lessons, his mother would tell me how worried she was about his lack of self-confidence, especially because in school too, he was pretty silent as well. But as we kept continuing our lessons, I would crack a few jokes or ask simple questions that just had one-word answers. And at the beginning of our lessons, I would focus on trying to get him to open up and become more comfortable around me. After I did that, he did start to answer with a word or two, and I did see some smiles. But later on, I learned that part of his lack of confidence also came from the fact that he didn't feel that his English was very strong because he mostly spoke Chinese at home. During our lessons, I would incorporate a mix of English and Mandarin so that he would feel more comfortable talking to me. I remember that there was this one lesson where right after winter break, I asked him how his holidays went. He answered me in a complete sentence in English about how much fun he had over his break. Obviously, his English wasn't perfect, but his mother and I were just so shocked, so overjoyed that He had just gained enough confidence to break out of his own shell and just talk to me in English even though it wasn't his most comfortable language. That moment was honestly just so heartwarming for me because my efforts to get him to be more comfortable around me had worked. And knowing that I contributed in some way to his growth is really fulfilling. Now obviously he's full of energy and eagerly answers my questions in all our lessons, and I just really love tutoring him. I hope to make a difference with music by sharing it in order to increase people's acceptance for one another, and recently I've been exploring ways to use music to spread cultural awareness and acceptance. As a classical pianist, I've mostly grown up with Western classical music, but just last year I helped kickstart an organization that is combating rising anti-Asian sentiments through using various art forms to educate people on the Asian American experience and Asian cultures. I routinely contribute videos of my piano performances where I would play pieces by Asian composers, and just learning those pieces opened me up to an entirely different realm of music. I can only imagine that for people who have never heard culturally Asian music before, it must have been a new experience for them just listening to the pieces as well. Personally, I love studying new languages and learning about other cultures. Foreign language courses have always been my favorite, so sharing a variety of cultural music really combines my passions for piano and foreign cultures. I hope to explore more music from other cultures, but most importantly, I hope my music can provide people with an introduction to any cultures they are not familiar with so that they are able to have a greater understanding of appreciation for everyone's beautiful differences. I also think music has the ability to really bridge connections between people no matter how different they are, because the emotions that music conveys are common and fundamental to human beings. I touched on this a little earlier, but before the pandemic, I would perform at senior living centers, usually around the holiday season. And one of my most rewarding experiences in playing piano was while I was performing. I was playing some holiday music and I just heard most of the senior residents singing along with my playing, which made that moment really heartwarming for me, since I knew that sometimes the residents could get lonely over the holidays, but I was able to bring some joy and comfort to them, even if it was just for that 1 hour. That is something I would love to continue to do in the future with any audience. I also read this quote once that said something along the lines of, during times of hardship, people turn to artists. And this quote really resonated with me, and it's ultimately my main goal in my musical pursuits, which is to provide people with something to reach out to, whether they are feeling joyful, pained, angered, any emotion really. So I would say that my biggest goals in creating a positive impact with music would be spreading cultural awareness and acceptance for everyone's differences, and showing that although we do have these differences, we also share common emotions. Hopefully along the way I can bring some joy into people's lives, or use music as a way to reach out to someone who wants to feel understood.